there, and welcome back to our podcast. I'm Wen.
And I'm Jen.
And we're here today to talk about classroom discipline. Before we get to that, though, I would just like to thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank those of you who've been continuing to support our podcast. We really appreciate it. We're trying to have our conversations get out there to the people who we can help or who might want to hear some different ideas of the way that we do things. So I appreciate that. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. We have a website where you can connect with us on Twitter and YouTubes and all those other good social media elements. And our website is wenandjen.com, wenandjen.com. And we love to have you go and visit our website. So let's get into our topic for today, Jen. Discipline is a big one. I don't know, this might be a longer podcast than usual because there are just a lot of moving parts when we think about discipline, right?
There are so many things to consider, yes.
So you're going to start us off with your ideas?
So to begin our discussion on discipline, which in my mind all starts with proper classroom management, whatever that is, right? I'd like to quote Robert Marzano from his book, Classroom Management That Works. And Marzano states that effective teaching and learning cannot take place in a poorly managed classroom. If students are disorderly and disrespectful, no apparent rules and procedures guide behavior, chaos becomes the norm. And in these situations, both the student and the teacher suffer. And to me, this is like the absolute truth.
Yeah.
You hear those horror stories about teachers who sit in their cars in the parking lot in the morning, gripping the steering wheel with like this dead look in their eyes, wondering why they didn't listen to their fathers and go to dental school. Or a student hating class because the teacher doesn't seem to care and it's a waste of time. Or, as was my experience in high school, they actually want to learn, but the teacher is doing his thing at the board and turns his back, like literally and figuratively, to the issue of classroom discipline while students are dodging spitballs and expletives.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that happened. That was not
That's extreme.
Nice. Yeah, it is pretty extreme, but I mean, it probably happens.
Yeah,
more
I'm sure
often than you
it
think.
does.
Yeah. So classroom management at first, of course, it's labor intensive. It takes effort and persistence, patience and energy and mindfulness and blood and sweat and tears and all of that. So fortunately for us, Marzano argues that good classroom managers can be made even if you aren't born one. And there's often that argument that you just have to be born with it. Right?
Well, I think there's some things in education that it's better if you're born, like you could just born with them. But I think that's true, that discipline is something that you can learn to manage in your classroom.
And always try to get better at.
Yeah, you can always be improving on everything, for sure.
That's why we have this podcast, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I'm learning a lot from you on these podcasts, and I'm hoping that we get some comments from people and hear their ideas too on our topics.
I hope so. Well, we try.
Yeah.
So books like classroom management, like Marzano's, will talk about things like establishing routines and expectations and how to handle transitions between activities or interruptions like announcements or answering the door, little things like that.
Right.
Use of material and equipment, from a set of Chromebooks to a pencil sharpener, because all of those things can have their issues. How group work and the roles they're in. And all of this, of course, must be considered when establishing a setting where you can cultivate an environment conducive to learning, where the expectation is high, the support reliable, the curriculum differentiated, a safe, gracious space where students can feel safe to make mistakes and comfortably benefit from them, because that's how learning happens. So within this cultivated spaces, every day is different. We have 100+ personalities, different personalities in a day to motivate and inspire, and you have to know your special populations. You have to research your kids at the beginning of the year. Then you have to know your curriculum, your TEKS. You have to do lesson planning, plan with the end in mind. Again, differentiate instruction, because one size does not fit all.
So, you're giving me a headache.
Yes. So the question is...
It's not true. It's just when I think about it like
teaching.
That. Yeah.
So the question is, with all of this in mind, where do we begin to consider the issue of discipline?
Right. Well, I mean, I think what you said from Marzano is true, that we have to have an orderly system and, some sort of structure to make the classroom work. And I think that there are some things that we can do that are tried and true to help with that. I think that a lot of things that happen in education coursework are accurate. You know, you need rules, you need consequences, you need to follow the student handbook, you know, whatever your school has decided.
Post your rules,
And all
make them known.
Yeah, and then be consistent with following through with them, not having favorites. You know, those things set up an environment like you're talking about, I think. But I also think that there are some specific tips and things that I've picked up over the years. I've taught all kinds of classes. I've had the spitball stuff tried in my classroom, and you know, it's really hard when a student thinks they can try to get away with that.
Right.
How do you stop that from happening? So I guess that's where we're going to delve into different topics today.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have one to share, or do you want me to start with one
I
of
would
mine?
like you to start. I really would.
Okay, well, mine are more practical. Jen likes to research, and you know, she's the journalist, so she likes to go and look and research. I like to speak from experience, so maybe that's what makes us like a good pair on the podcast. Maybe
Yin and yang. There we go.
Yeah. So I think my first piece of advice, and all these pieces of advice are just things that I have had to learn and cultivate over the course of my own teaching practice. And the first one is learning patience. And I think when you first start teaching, it's hard because most of us are still young. You're in your early 20s. You're not necessarily a patient person in general, at least I wasn't.
Right.
And it's hard to be patient when you have students who aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And it's easy to just fly off the handle and yell or, you know, have a reaction, whatever the reaction might be. But it's also easy to ignore it and just pretend like it's not happening. And both of those extremes, I think, are problematic.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I've tried both of those things, and neither one paid off a whole lot for me. So what I think is best is patience. You know, continue dealing with the situation that's presenting itself, but you have to remember you're the adult in the room, and ultimately what you say goes. So you have to help the students understand that there's a reason why you're having an expectation of them, and sometimes you have to repeat that a bunch of times before they finally fall into place if they do.
A bunch of times.
Or at the very least remind them that, you know, okay, well, I get that you don't want to, you know, X, whatever it is, but it's not acceptable for you to make it so that other people around you can't do what they're supposed to do.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of times rationalizing that way, I mean, I can't make a kid put a pencil to a piece of paper. I can keep encouraging that student to do that, but I can make a kid not bug the person sitting next to them. And that's an expectation that I have in my class. And it takes patience sometimes, but sometimes I've had students who, I don't know, they need role models. They need an adult handling a situation with patience, with, you know, being firm.
Sure.
And having expectations, but that patience is something that maybe they don't see a lot of in their current situation. And so they need to see an adult role model handling students respectfully and being patient. And so it's good to be an example and a role model. Try not to take it personally is how I got through that. Right. And how I cultivated patience. Because at first, a student acting out, you put it on yourself as a judgment, and you say, oh, well, they don't like the lesson, or they don't like me, or they don't like my classroom, or what happens in here. And all that might be true, but you can't live with that in the front of your mind. And so I usually try to say it's usually something else going on. Usually there's another issue underlying the behavior. And if I can just be patient with it, I can usually get through and handle most things that are going. Maybe a kid just wants to push your button and they're waiting for you to fly off the handle.
And that happens.
It does. And if you react with patience, take a breath, look up at the ceiling, do what you have to do, right? You know,
1, 2, 3, 4,
yeah,
5.
Count backward from 10, whatever. I think cultivating patience is like my first tip. What's the first thing that you have on your list there after Marzano?
Well, I like to think about my environment, and that's one of my first go-tos when I'm trying to create a good year for myself and my students. And it's kind of like what I like to call academic feng shui. Okay.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds really weird, but go with me. So This means that you're trying to establish like your habitat. You know, this is your territory. You know, you want your habitat to be, the best for everybody, the best for your kids, the best for yourself. And for some teachers, this might mean, the rows, the classical arrangement of a classroom where you just have rows
My
of
classroom's
desks.
pretty much like that.
Yeah, and mine has been at certain times of the year because this also does change. For some teachers, this might mean stations.
Yeah.
Right now, my classroom, as we're sitting here right now, you can see it's kind of an amphitheater type situation where I'm in the center and the desks are sort of all around me. Sometimes they're in pairs for turn and talks or think pair shares or a combination thereof. So I'd like to really applaud teachers on this campus who have made the effort to inspire and motivate their students with classroom environments. Some have artwork or instructional posters on their walls, or they have like inventive seating arrangements for those who have and some teachers have actually traded like desks for tables, and they have this really relaxed cafe environment.
Flexible seating,
with
they call
ambient lighting and music in the background. And I think when students see that you put that much thought and energy and effort into the environment, that's really upping the expectation of the class, and setting an expectation for their behavior. Like they'll come into a room and they're like, wow, this lady's serious. Like this is, she's in it to win it. You know what I mean?
This
like
is a learning
yes,
environment.
This is a learning. I will learn here. Sadly, in the past, I have heard students complain about teachers who the walls are bare, and the teacher's desk is a mess. Things are still in boxes, like they haven't quite moved in, or they're getting ready to move out.
It's like an institutional setting kind of thing.
And that sends a strong message. That sets a tone.
Yeah.
And it's not a good one. You can figure that out for yourself. So
So the environment says we're here to get some work done.
exactly.
In
So
one way or another.
So in my sort of passive aggressive way, when I do have an issue with discipline, I feel like I'm playing a game of chess. I'm rearranging the desks. I'm trying different configurations, and I'm thinking like a chess player. If I move this here, what's going to be the consequence? Am I going to win or lose? And that's happened a few times this year, but I have currently found a situation that works really well. I've minimized distractions. I've found groups that have worked well together. And so that's really my first tactic, is just to have that environment. So.
Yeah, I think you've really played around with, where students are allowed to sit. And it can depend. Seating arrangements can sometimes help a lot with discipline. And you have to consider the level of the course, the maturity of the students,
their ability,
their
history.
Yeah.
The required accommodations for that student. You have to keep all of those things
right,
in
in case there's a student who needs to sit near the front or something like that. But all those things, if a student doesn't work well with, friend A next to them because they're always chatting, figure out who friend B is, and maybe they can sit next to friend B and still get some work done or something.
And I don't,
that way it's like a little bit of a compromise.
I don't by any means want to be like a spirit crusher, which I've been called in the past.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just going to arrange the soul out of a classroom where there's no joy left whatsoever. That's not my intention, but I do need to find something that works, and where they're happy and we're happy, and find that happy medium. Yeah.
I've been successful in some classes. Of course, we teach high school, and it's a little bit different than maybe elementary school. But I've been successful even in developmental courses where I tell students you can sit where you want as long as you can get things done. But as soon as I see that you can't, or you can't behave, or you can't behave in a conducive way for the whole class, then I will move you.
Yeah, I'm going to treat you like an adult until you cease to act like one.
Exactly, until I see that you can't handle it. So I'll step in when I need to. That's a good tactic also. I think that another thing that I wanted to mention is something I learned. One of my principals very early in my career, he didn't say this to me, it was at a staff development, and I can still imagine the moment when he said, it was like a light bulb for me.
Oh, wow.
And it stems from my patience idea. If you are patient with students and you treat them with respect, even if they're not treating you with respect, because you're the adult, like I said, you can then pull a student who's not getting back on track in the hallway, and your conversation can begin with this phrase: haven't I always treated you with respect?
Right.
And at that moment, the student has to think, well, yeah, you have. And then, of course, they're just going to jump in their mind to how they were acting and why they're in the hallway with you. Or you can draw that to their attention if it has escaped them. And you can always pull the card of, if I've always treated you with respect, then I expect at least that much back from you. And usually that's when it pretty much dissolves for me. And that was a game changer for me when my principal at the time, probably 20 years ago, said that as when we were having a discipline in service. And I think that expecting respect from students is something that only works if you're willing to reciprocate it. So that patience is really crucial, because that's when they can know that there were moments when they pushed your button, but you handled them with respect and without yelling or being rude to them.
Right.
And I think that if you can maintain that, then you can always pull that trump card of, I've always treated you this way, I expect you to at least do that in return. And then sometimes I follow that up. If I ever have to take a student in the hallway, I feel like that's the best way to deal with a one-on-one. I will always offer them a cool down period. I'll say to them, do you want to go get a drink of water? Do you want to stay out here for a minute before you come back in? Just so that they can let what I talked about with them run through their mind one more time before they come back in and have a little change of behavior.
And that's such a demonstration of your ability to work with them.
That works, I want to say 97% of the time. You're always going to have a few students that are just going to push it no matter what,
Sure.
because of anger issues or whatever is going on with them. But the majority of the students that I've done that tactic with, it's been a successful resolution to the problem. And usually that puts the student back on track with you for the year. Usually I don't have problems with those students again because they already had their little talk. You know, if they're a little more on the immature side, you might have to do it again, or something similar. But I tend to handle things that way first. So what's next on your
what you
tips
just
list?
explained had a lot to do with what I was going to mention next. But one of the things that I wanted to say in conjunction with what you just said about, always treating students with respect. And I'm not saying this to insinuate that some teachers do this or that this is a norm by any means, but I'm not a yeller. I do not yell. I reserve a louder voice for emergencies, or I'm not going to use it if there's not an alarming situation or if there is no danger involved. You know what I mean? I'm not going to use it. Why don't I yell, and why don't I use that often or at all? Because once you start yelling, there's really nowhere else to go. You're kind of at the top of your voice, and if you ever need to get your students' attention, it's going to be difficult because they're used to that sound already. It's kind of like crying wolf, I guess, in a certain respect. So in the classroom, when I do have my beautiful arrangement and things are working out hopefully the way they should, and discipline issues do arise, and usually in my case, I don't know about yours, but in my case, it's usually when I see that students, I've already delivered my lecture, the students are working independently, and the talking becomes problematic, or I see they're off task, or I see that they are just chatting and they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And that's where I borrow a page from Jennifer Gonzalez from Cult of Pedagogy. I saw this
great resource.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's amazing. She has this little video on YouTube, and she calls it, if I can remember correctly, it's called the 5-second solution for a talkative class. And basically
5 seconds, wow.
Well, it's not always 5 seconds. She makes that little
That's like
stipulation.
lose 20 pounds in a week.
Yes, it's more like 5 years, but who's counting now? So her suggestion is, if you're walking around and the talking's an issue, when you call their attention, for whatever reason, either you want to get their attention to remind them of what they're supposed to be doing, or you want to get their attention because you want them to make sure to do this part of the assignment correctly, or you're about to end class and you need to give an exit ticket, whatever it's going to be, that I kind of do a modified version of this. I raise my hand, that's my signal. My kids know that when I raise my hand, I'm not going to yell above them. I stand somewhere visible and I put my hand up, and they'll poke each other and shush each other. And it takes anywhere from 5 seconds to sometimes 20 seconds or 30 seconds. But instead of yelling over them and then getting angry that they didn't hear you, you just have that wait time. You just have that wait time where you give them a chance to look at you. Because that's what's going to happen is you're going to talk over them. you expect them to do because you expected them to stop and listen to you right away, and they're not going to do that. And then you've created a situation.
Okay.
You yourself, the teacher, have created a situation. You can't be angry at them. You know they didn't hear you. You can't expect that because they're in the middle of something and they're kids. Even if it's high school kids, it's still kids. And so that's one of her suggestions. I use that in conjunction with what I like to call and what my students laugh about. I call it sharking. And here's what sharking is. When you think about a shark in the water, what do you picture?
A Jaws.
A Jaws, and he's a danger. If he's around you,
Right.
there's a dangerous situation happening, right? You have to be on guard. So when I shark, I'm doing two things. I'm watching, so the proximity of my proximity to students should put them on guard where they're going to behave or get more on task a little bit more. But I also borrow a page. Here's another resource from Doug Lemov's Teach Like a Champion, where I do different types of questioning. And I do questioning like peppering, which is I'll ask random questions, even if they're not expecting it. I use, I'm trying to remember here, no opt-out, where let's say I ask a student a question and they're not able to answer it. I'll ask another student within that group to answer that question. They'll usually give me an answer because they're preparing for it because they know what I'm going to do. And then I go back to the first student and I ask them to repeat what that other student said. So they know that I'm going to be looking, I'm going to be sharking, and I'm going to be listening. And the expectation is that they're going to be able to answer questions when I ask those questions. And that actually curbs the talking just a little bit and the off-task behavior just a little bit, just to know that I am here and I am watching and there is this expectation there.
Yeah.
And that's something really simple that, that teachers can do. I'm sure they do a modified version of that already. You know what I mean?
Who's they?
Other teachers? Teachers in general, I'm sure that you don't give the instruction and go back and sit at your desk.
Well, right. I mean, we're talking about things that are a little bit beyond the obvious. Pay attention to your students.
Right.
Be alert.
Sure. These are
walk
specific,
around.
Right.
I mean, like all those things are pretty obvious. If you're having discipline problems, but you don't get up from your desk ever, then I already know why you're having discipline problems.
Exactly. But
but students will act up if they feel like they can get away with it, or if they, for some reason don't like the situation or the environment. And so it's not like you have to do things on purpose, but you need to be vigilant and you need to be paying attention to what's going on in class and observant and, but not just for discipline reasons. I know this is a little bit off topic because we're talking about discipline, but it's in the realm of student behavior. Every once in a while, there's going to be a student who's got something going on and they're upset. And you need to notice that as a teacher.
Yes.
And so it's just about having a comfort level with knowing how your students behave, that when that day happens, because it's going to happen multiple times in your career, where somebody comes in and something's wrong.
Sure.
And you need to go over to that student, and first you need to recognize that that's the case.
Yeah.
And if you're a desk sitter, not only are you in bad discipline, but you don't even know when your students might be having an issue. And then you just need to approach the student and say, are you okay? Do you need something? How can I help you? Like, you need to approach that student about that change in behavior. And I think once the students know that you're paying attention, that's a big chunk of the discipline issue, because they're going to know, I can't get away with this kind of behavior, that kind of behavior with this teacher.
Right.
And you want to be that teacher.
Yeah. I just had that happen to me this week. One of my students came in red-faced and upset, and I just quietly went over to her and I said, take care of yourself, do what you need to do.
Right.
And she nodded and she went out to the bathroom. She came back 5 minutes later and just kind of gave me a smile, like, okay, I'm cool. And that was it. Because it's something as simple as that. It's
an emotional time, teenagers, middle school.
Is it ever?
Something could happen in a hallway
20
seconds before class starts that you don't even know. Something could have happened at home or in the car on the way to school, on the bus, whatever. And I mean, it's just about demonstrating to the students, and also creating an environment where you're observant.
Right. And
of
that's
your
that
students.
respect you talked about. I'm respecting your feelings. I'm respecting your space.
Well, I'm respecting you enough as a person that I notice when something's not right.
Exactly.
Just like you would for a colleague. You know, if you walked past a colleague's room and their head was down on their desk and they were upset, you would volunteer yourself to go in and say, is there something you need? Is there something I can help you with? So it's no different with students. So I forgot if it's my turn or your turn. We kind of mixed
Rock,
it up
paper,
there.
scissors.
We kind of mixed them up there. I only have 2 more tips, so I don't know how many more you have.
Well, actually, I just want to really talk about one more thing before we get to our gold stars. So I don't know how often you've encountered this situation in the classroom, but I'll talk about this because it's happened to me very recently, where you have a situation in a classroom where the student becomes belligerent or confrontational,
Right.
or downright just mean or threatening.
Yeah.
This happened to me recently, and the way I handled it, I was really proud of myself, because a lot of this I have theories about, and when the practice times comes, sometimes it happens as planned, and sometimes something wrong happens. So anyway, so this day I had a situation. The student was refusing to cooperate in class. He was breaking this rule, a pretty major rule, and so I had to ask him to step out in the hall the way you do. Now, that would have been a great time for me to use, what you have to say about haven't I always respected you. That would have been a really powerful thing for me to use, and that's definitely going in my toolbox. But I pulled the student into the hall, and basically I explained to him why it was that I had called him out in the hall. I asked him to stop what he was doing. This can take some effort, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
But once outside, I explained to him why I'd called him out, how their behavior or actions were a violation of the classroom rules, or it was a disruption to the class. I asked them to stop rule breaking or the disruptive behavior. And then I asked them, to take some time, and then I want them to come back in the classroom. Now, often I have to ask them to sit elsewhere because I anticipate that the student may find it challenging to sort of police themselves where they previously sat. And I don't think that's unreasonable. So at this point, there are 2 ways that this can go. Okay? Most of the time, this is the end of the situation. We go back in the class, the student moves.
Right.
Problem solved. However, if they refuse to cooperate, or if the student's behavior becomes menacing or vulgar, I have to explain to them that the alternate option of this situation would unfortunately be removal from class.
Right.
And probably like a disciplinary issue. I remind them that it's nothing personal, like you said. I have a job to do, and I need them to allow me to do it. It's my job to maintain a learning environment for the sake of all the students. I tell them that those are their options, and whatever they choose, it's their choice. It's their choice.
Right.
This tactic really does allow you to bypass a lot of the issues that might arise after the fact. A student claiming that I didn't give them a fair chance, or that they didn't understand what they did wrong, or that I was unfair. This tactic also helps them build a sense of accountability. Whatever happens to them, it's a result of their choices, In a large part, that idea can be extended to their entire academic performance, to attend class or not attend class, to sleep or not sleep, do homework, to cheat, to attend tutoring, all choices with consequences. Unfortunately, that day, things did not go well. He very deliberately chose to use a few expletives and chose to go to the office and face that situation. But it was his choice. It was his choice.
Right.
And I was patient. I never raised my voice. I almost had a pleading tone when I was talking to him. Maybe that aggravated him even
I want
more.
you to make the right choice
like, come on,
here.
Like, you really want to go? No, you don't. You want to stay,
Right.
My class isn't so bad, but it was his choice, and he made that choice. So with that in mind, I want to mention one last thing before I shut up for today. So what we know about the teenage brain, here's our last source for the day, is that it's still developing. The frontal lobe involved in decision making and how their behavior, a teenager's behavior affects other people, is not yet operating at full capacity. According to this pediatric neurologist at Children's Hospital in Boston, her name is Frances Jensen, and she was interviewed for this NPR story titled "The Teen Brain." This might explain why teenagers are sort of self-centered and prone to making wrong decisions for themselves. So if you're interested in reading this very interesting article, there's a link to it on our website. So with this in mind, what we can do as adults is acquaint them clearly with consequences of their behavior and give them multiple opportunities to learn the process of being mindful about the things that they do. It seems that if teenagers could be more present in themselves, more sort of conscientious, that they'd be better off and have an easier time of things. And we need to give them those opportunities, because I have the feeling from experience that they don't get them a lot. There aren't a lot of people out there saying you need to be conscientious, you need to think more about your decisions. Or if they are, then they need more people telling them that, because it hasn't sunk in yet.
Right.
Okay. And of course, as educators, as parents, we want what's best for them. We want them to have an easier time of things. And so there you go. There's essentially my philosophy and go-to tactics for discipline. I hope you listeners get something useful out of it, even if it's just to go and study Marzano or Lamave or Gonzalez for more ideas if you're having issues in the area of discipline.
We'll put some links on the weblog and in
Sure.
the YouTube description.
Great reading.
Whatever you're listening to there. I have one more resource that I want to mention because it's helped me out of some very specific situations.
Okay.
And I think that, we've been talking mainly in generalities with a few anecdotes and a few little, personal stories. But there is a website called disciplinehelp.com. And as soon as I discovered it, I found it really helpful. And sometimes I act on the advice there, and sometimes it's just informational for me. But if you go to disciplinehelp.com, it is based on the method You Can Handle Them All, which is a book by DeBruyne and Carson. But the website is just a treasure trove of information, because what they do, you have to create an account.
Okay.
Otherwise you'll be limited in what you can see.
Don't want that.
You don't have to pay for it, but you do have to make an account. That way they know who's in there, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
But there's a list of like over 130 student behaviors, down to stuff like the agitator, the grade grubber, the irresponsible, the apathetic. So when you have a really specific behavior
Yeah.
that a student has that you can tell is ingrained in their behavior, and it's just something they've been doing for a long time, but it rubs you the wrong way or it causes a problem in class. I have a kid right now who likes to answer all the time, but the answers are not well thought out.
Oh.
And so I'm always forced to what he calls shoot him down.
Ooh.
Because I don't need for the students to learn incorrect information.
You spirit crusher, you.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you know what I mean? So how do you handle it when it's not exactly, a crisis
Sure.
behavior, but it's a behavior that you can try to change and try to work with the student to improve for the classroom environment. And their theory is before you can try to change a student behavior, you need to identify that.
Sure.
You need to understand the effects of that behavior. Identify the cause of it, avoid mistakes with that particular, there's certain things
Sure.
that you just don't do with somebody who's showing a certain behavior.
Okay.
And then sort of study up on that behavior and what is going to work. It's a psychological experiment in a way.
Sure.
So you can take something like, the interrupter, and the website actually breaks it down for you and says, what are some reasons why that could be happening? What logically does not work with a person who does this? What does work with a person who does this? I found it helpful just even in my personal life, because I know people.
You've labeled me. I know you
are
have. What am I?
interrupters or whatever, and it's what? It's not just for students, but we're talking about student discipline today.
Sure.
But there's also more serious ones on there. There's stuff like the bully, the rebel, the truant, the sexuality broadcaster.
I have some of all of those. Yes.
Right. Well, the one who just always brings everything around to sex because they're teenagers, their hormones are going and all that stuff. And so it's kind of like, what do you do? Do you just ignore it, or do you?
I don't know.
You
We'll find
can't
out.
endorse it,
Right.
obviously. So I really like this website. It helps me with a lot of those specific behaviors. There are, 140 or 150
Wow.
different, very specific behaviors, do's and don'ts, what could be behind it. And I think that if you're having a specific issue that's reoccurring with a student, that is a really good resource where you could go to kind of narrow it down for yourself and figure it out.
That sounds like a really great resource. Absolutely.
Yeah, I've used it many, many times, and so.
And again, it is labor intensive, but it's an investment. You know, of course, it's going to take some time to go in there and research this kid and employ all these tactics.
Well, they break it down pretty well on that side.
But it's going to save you time in the long run. It really is. It's worth doing.
Well, and you might see the very next day an opportunity to put something that you read into place, and it's not an overnight fix.
Sure.
They don't say overnight,
right.
Voila,
Magic.
the kid is great. But we have to start working toward better behaviors, and so bringing it to their attention how to do that and so on. So, all right, so moving on to our gold stars. Who's your gold star this week, Jennifer?
Okay. So my gold star this week is my husband, Orlando.
Oh, wow.
So he's been so supportive of my work with this podcast, and really whenever I have the opportunity at work or in my personal life to try something new, he's always behind me 100%, convincing me that whatever it is, I would be really great at it. Whether it be flying to conferences all over the country, which I've done, or spending 2 weeks in Austin to become an on-ramps instructor, which I also do. He was like, "Go, fly, I'll be here when you get back. It's all good." So I really want to thank him for being my champion. He makes me want to be the best person I can be, and he supports me to be the best person I can be, and I owe him so much. So
that's sweet.
Honey, you're my gold star. Thank you.
Ding.
Ding.
My gold star is something a little different this week. I want to make a gold star for our listeners.
Oh, wow.
We're just starting out on this journey, and we're really conceiving of it as a long-term activity for us, a way for us to be creative, but also to share some things that we know and learn more from each other. And, kind of carry our listeners along with us on that journey. And we really do appreciate that you're taking the time out of your day to do it. We're trying to keep our podcasts kind of short, but we know that, 20 minutes or half an hour is a chunk of your day. And we really appreciate that you're taking the time to listen and, participate and think about some of the ideas that we're setting forth. So my gold star goes to our listeners this week.
Yes. And if you have any suggestions for a future...
For sure. We have an email at wenandjenpodcast@gmail.com. I think there's a link to that on the website too. So if you have some ideas of things that you'd like to hear us talk about, we're more than welcome to do that. We're thinking about having some guests into our podcast, so we'll do that. We have a ongoing list of topics that we want to discuss, but we do thank you for listening. And anything else from you today, Jen?
No, I'm grateful also, so thank you. Keep listening.
We appreciate it. All right, until next time.